helping to clean up hurricane damage from 2 years ago. This was Maria. This slammed into Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And you can see the size of the hurricane relative to the size of the island. And you've all seen the pictures. Now, this last year, not only did we have hurricanes, but we had those fires out in California. California tends to be dry anyway, but they will usually have winter storms come in and wet the soil and green up the vegetation and so on. Because of some of the effects of climate change, we have the setup of a high pressure system off the coast of the west coast, which blocks the winter storms from coming in. A ridge in meteorologist parlance means a high pressure system. Okay? And so this ridge that comes in here and sits there, they call the ridiculously resilient ridge for the water, because scientists have sense of humor too. And that stops the rain from coming in and wetting down the west coast, or California anyway, which makes it drier so that when that spark hits, faulty wires, I think is what it was this last time, that in the fires you get monster fires. And so the storm track, if it comes in, will come in to the north of this high pressure system and mix this California all together. And so climate change is likely to increase. You probably can't see these numbers very well because this is kind of a low resolution image. A 1 degree increase in Celsius will increase the annual burn area of this area in red here on the west coast by 300%. And so these other areas like northern Arizona, which I had the great pleasure of visiting this last summer for the first time, Matter of fact, that great place, there's lots of cool stuff to see, is 470 times, 4.7 times more likely to burn, and so on. Now, areas like this in the United States, the people sometimes relocate, but if this burn happens somewhere where people don't have a lot of resources to begin with, there is a drying out of parts of Central America, which is one of the reasons why some people are, without much in the way of means, are so desperate to get out of there. These disruptions cause people to leave their home, and when they leave their home, they go other places where they become refugees. And sea level will have that effect, as will the fires. And our future as a human civilization is hundreds of millions of climate refugees. We are seeing it now. And that leads to a moral issue, 2 moral issues to be exact. One moral issue is that those people least responsible for causing climate change, because they are of means where they are not in the, able to burn much in the way of fossil fuels, they don't have air conditioners and things like that. Those people are least responsible for causing climate change are the most vulnerable to it. Those people living in the Brahmaputra Delta in Bangladesh, for instance. So, what are we going to do about it? I stole this picture, by the way. This was printed in or done up, modified by the magazine, the Atlantic magazine, and I like this. You know, Uncle Sam rolling up his sleeves to get to work. Okay. If we look over the last 60 years, we can see this graph is the increase globally, take it all together, of carbon emissions, things that are released into the atmosphere by burning something else, or leaky pipes, or leaky air conditioners, or so on. And The U.S. is this yellow one here. China is really on the rise. All the other countries, the EU and India down here. India and China are rapidly industrializing, and their people want to have the middle-class lifestyles that we have. And so that's, you know, much of the what's going on there. But if you go to Beijing or Delhi and just don't breathe. I haven't been there, just seen the pictures. Here's the part that makes people freak out, as if the other stuff didn't. If you take all the known fossil fuel reserves, all the coal, all the oil, all the gas, that the rights of which is owned by companies, you know, ExxonMobil or Sunoco or BP or what have you, or owned by petroleum states like Nigeria or Russia, okay? If you took all those things, all that carbon that is owned, that is the rights for drilling or digging up that or fracking that gas belongs to some company that have bought the leases on that land or whatever the legalities of it are. If you took all that fossil fuels and you actually burn it, they sold it and they burned it, it would end human civilization. I'm not kidding. We're talking about not necessarily everyone dying, but we're talking about civilization, the coherent civilization that we have not being around anymore. And in order to limit the further warming to 2 degrees Celsius, we need to keep 2/3 of that stuff in the ground. Now, if you were to tell ExxonMobil that they had to keep 2/3 of their resources, their fossil fuel reserves in the ground, what would they say? They would not be happy about it, okay? Because after all, their stock price is based on the expectation of future earnings based on the reserves that they own. That's one of the reasons why those companies have spent so much money trying to convince us that this is all no big deal. I don't know what the solution there is. But as a civilization, we need to switch to carbon neutral energy. We're doing it. That's the good news, is that solar and wind is cheaper every year. I buy my electricity from a company that, at least they say, is buying it from wind and hydropower. None of these sources of energy are without flaw. They all have their issues. Okay? There isn't any way to generate electricity without there being issues that we've got to deal with. But nonetheless, we have to deal with them. I have a grandson. He's a year old. And I'll be damned if human civilization were to fall if it does so without Granddad doing the best he could. And I'm not saying that just to be emotional, but it's the truth. Okay? So, we need to shift as a civilization away from carbon and more toward this. As individuals, we need to consume less. We need to have smaller families and smaller homes and smaller vehicles and smaller shopping lists and smaller meals and less meat, and honestly, that will make us healthier as well. Okay? Here's an encouraging thing that's inspirational, I think. The two things that would do the most to decrease the amount of carbon emissions that come from our civilization, the two things that would help the most are things that you may not think of in terms of something related to fossil fuels. One of them is to make sure that we provide education for little girls wherever they are. Okay? Young girls that can stay and have the opportunity to stay in school will have fewer babies and they'll have them later in life. And we need gently to have fewer people on the planet. The other thing is, and it's related to that as well, is providing family planning. Family planning, providing the means of women to control their family size, and helping those girls get education will do more than any other thing we could do to help future generations. The second moral quandary is associated here. Those people, us, whose lifestyle are most responsible for climate change, won't live to see the destruction it will cause, but our grandchildren will. And so we're faced as a civilization, as individuals, but as a civilization, we are faced with some pretty serious decisions. And there'll be a lot of decisions that seem to be easy ones that will take us over the cliff. But the ones that are complex, the ones that require using our brains and our hearts at the same time, are the ones that are going to do the best by our grandkids. I'd be glad to answer questions if I haven't totally bummed you all out.
You ready for the lights?
Lights.
What is the heat
Yes, sir.
capacity of the ocean?
In terms of how much more heat can they hold?
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a way of calculating that. I don't have those numbers at hand. But we should be very happy that we have that relatively cool ocean, because if it were not for the ocean, the temperature would have increased about 113 degrees on land. That ocean is a buffer for us.
And it's going to kill all the fish.
That's part of it. That's the thing, is that how many lobsters are there in Long Island Sound these days?
They're all
Yeah. And why are they gone? Because, well, maybe overfishing in some cases, but because it's too warm. Yes, sir.
I read a study that was published not that long ago about a serious decline in plankton in the ocean. Do you know anything about that?
Well, plankton, which are the basis of the food webs, sort of like green plants on land. Everyone eats those or eats something that eats those. Okay, they will be, the amount of plankton in the ocean will be affected by temperatures in some degree, but nutrients also. But there's another thing we're doing in the oceans that's really cutting everything up. It's all that plastic. And the plastic that, that we drink our water out of, And, yeah, I mean, and it's really convenient, And the plastic that we, take our groceries home with. I fight that battle every day to remember to take my reusable bags into the grocery store. And about half the time I forget, and I feel terrible for it. And I'm nagging myself so that I forget it less over time. All that stuff, you can't throw it away because there is no way. Unless you can put it on a rocket ship and send it to the sun. There is no way. It's here with us. The future geologists will look at sediment cores from the oceans and find all sorts of tiny little pieces of plastic. The detritus, the junk that our civilization has generated. And so another thing that's not listed on my list there that we can all do is use less of that stuff. Okay? And think about it. Our grandparents didn't have all that crap. They survived. My grandparents survived the Great Depression, and back in my Okie and hillbilly grandparents survived because they knew how to do stuff. They knew how to grow plants, they knew how to can their excess tomatoes and all this stuff. And they relied on their neighbors, but they didn't rely on convenience stuff because they didn't really have access to it. Maybe they would have if they had access to it. Yes, ma'am.
Photosynthesis slows down and stops at a certain temperature.
Yeah, every biological process is moderated. It is controlled, the speed of, controlled by enzymes. And those enzymes are proteins. And proteins lose their efficiency, their effect, their ability to speed up chemical reactions when they heat up because they lose their shape. And so different plants, of course, have different tolerances for that. But, you know, the real thing I think is going to be an issue with agriculture is drawing out drought-prone areas. It's going to be loss of good agricultural land that's on the seashore or in delta areas that are going to be sunk. And it's also going to be areas, well, you know, it happened, we saw an example of it, happened in the 30s. And the southern plains, the Dust Bowl, okay? The area of the southern plains, which was naturally shortgrass prairie, had, after World War I, had a fairly long wet spell, extra rain, which caused people to think, wow, I can grow wheat here. And so they imported a variety of wheat that would grow under those conditions, and they plowed, and some people would plow too much, and they would plow in such a way that the topsoil was exposed to wind, which caused dust storms and caused Woody Guthrie to write some of those songs that we're familiar with. So long, that's been good to know you. That's one. All because we saw a little patch of wet weather in the 20s, assumed that that was normal, realized to our dismay 10 years later that it wasn't normal, and a lot of people who couldn't make it under those conditions decided to get in their whatever conveyance they had and head to California, where they were met at the border by the Los Angeles police officers who said, we don't have room for you. We all read the book in Grapes of Wrath in high school, I'm sure. Okay? Tom Joad and all that. I mean, my grandfather's brothers. Honest to God, I've got a great uncle named Thurbert and another one named Cecil. And Thurbert and Cecil were Dust Bowl Okies. They moved from Oklahoma out to California, and they were able to make a go of it out there.
So here we are, 2019, Fairfield County. You mentioned, you know, one of the things we could do is educate young women.
This isn't the area where
Right.
where that sort of
Exactly.
education is probably the most cost effective.
Right. So is there something else? Is there a sort of a one or two tier thing that each one of us could look at and say something that we can do?
Well, you know, we have our own personal lifestyles to address. And these are, well, there is a, got a chalkboard right on it. There is a book, an organization called drawdown.org. And they have a website. They have this nice full-color coffee table book where they have a bunch of scientists who have calculated the effect of, what, 50, 60 different things that humans can do and let you know, A, how much they would cost on a global scale, B, how much of a positive effect they would have, and listing all the secondary effects that may be positive. And go on the website, buy the book, read up, study up. You know, we all have things to work to do just for our own, without being obnoxious to everyone.
Just had a power question. You were talking about how you use some of them that you had from the options up there, but why do you feel so there's not as many options available to the suburban household for power there, or electricity or something like that? Like there, I know there are, we've actually tried for our house, like, you know, there's possibility for solar, but you had a lot of different options there. Why it's so difficult for people to use alternative options for
Some of
electricity and stuff?
some of them are geographical.
Yes,
For instance, we're not likely to have too much geothermal around here.
yes.
If you're in Iceland, however, okay? So there are nuclear plants. They are being phased out because of other kinds of concerns. We need to think about that, whether we want to phase them out just yet, because they are carbon neutral. They have their own issues, as all these things do. Hydropower has its own issues. A lot of electricity you would buy here probably comes from Quebec and those hydro plants up there. It is carbon neutral-ish because the reservoirs that form up produce, upstream, the dams produce some methane, some more, some less, But, it's all balanced. Geothermal, we're not in the right place for it. Tidal has not yet been developed. It's kind of, in some places, yes. Problem is with tidal power is the equipment gets beat up pretty badly. And so we still need to work on the engineering. Those of you who are wondering what to do with your lives, environmental engineering would be a wonderful thing for you to do if you've got the ability for the math and stuff. Wind and solar are being implemented. The costs are going down. You can get solar for the roof of your house if you have enough sunlight. My house in Bethel's got too much shade. I'd have to take down 2 pretty big trees in order to get enough before Solar City or whoever would even put the panels up there. But what I can do as a Connecticut, we have our choice to which of our electrical generators to buy our electricity from. And don't just do the default, because the default is the cheapest thing they can find. Okay? Go through it, figure out what you want to do, and pick one that makes you able to sleep at night. The other thing is for those of us who have 403Bs or all our retirement funds. Those retirement funds are invested in companies. Go through there and decide who you want to invest your money in. As it turns out, you can, this is what I've done a couple of years ago, you can take a fund that is part of your investment for your retirement and look at all the different kind of companies that invests in. You may decide you don't want to give some of those people your money. But you can often find what's called a social choice fund.